viewporting. There we go. All right. So really, remember, there's just kind of a last few things right here. So this is going to be like probably like a 5-6 minute lecture review quick for it, and I'll get the video uploaded to YouTube pretty quickly for you guys. Like I said, a lot of you guys aren't even quite at that stage yet anyways. You're going to be finishing the modeling up, doing some texturing. So yeah. All right, so of course we were shading, right? And we do want to switch up to our different viewport types, right? That's kind of your normal shaded. Remember, that's Eevee. And you'll notice Eevee looks pretty darn nice because it is a pretty nice real-time previewer. But this one right here, this last one, right, that is our full render, right? And you can see the full sky background. You see the full shadow casting of the objects looking nicer. True ray tracing of the reflections, right? The light bouncing off the objects and actually the true objects reflecting, right? Eevee kind of does a generic real-time reflection based on the that kind of generic sky background it has, which you could change, right? So like when you're in Eevee here, if you go into there, you can actually change that background to be different stuff, right? But you see it's kind of doing more of like a generic kind of background rendering effect. I think it was that one. That's the normal one. Yep. But this one is your full render. Particularly, we want to make sure to click on the one that looks like a little suitcase, right? It's kind of like looks like a suitcase microwave. And that's where you can pick your rendering engine, right? Eevee's the real-time one, which is that. And we've seen Eevee's pretty amazing, and it's only going to get better. They're integrating Vulkan to it right now. They have plans down the future to do real-time ray tracing. So Eevee is already pretty awesome. It's only going to get better going forward in future versions. But we want to use the full Cycles rendering engine because that's a full offline renderer that's going to really give us all of our bells and whistles, ray tracing, global illumination. So yeah, I don't think we're going to worry about shadow softness for this one. You know, it'll look pretty good here, but it is the kind of thing if you needed to, you could always kind of go adjust some of those settings. But I think we're going to be fine with this. We just want to get really the night sky and the material stuff. All right, so the other thing when you're in this little kind of area, right, the scene kind of, because that's your tool properties, right, and that's kind of the scene properties. That's also scene, right, this one that looks like a printer icon. That's where you can control your render resolution. The default 1080, 1920, which is, you know, HD, not Ultra HD. It's not 4K HD, which is like 3,900 something, like 2,000 something, you know, twice the size roughly. But that is 1080, and that's fine for what we want. You can tell it to use different extensions here, and if you want it to have a higher color depth. So you have those controls right there. But the defaults actually are going to work fine, so I just figured it doesn't hurt to see that in video form again, right? But here we want cycles. But we also want to open up the denoising area right here, right? Because you'll notice there's a little bit of noise in the render, right? You can kind of see that little kind of speckling, kind of dottiness. That's just the noise that you sometimes get with renderers, and more renderers are actually building in denoisers right into the renderer instead of a post effect you do. So we'll turn on render, and you can also turn it on for viewport so you can kind of get a better idea of what it's going to look like viewport. And you see how it's actually, that noise is gone. And you can use the default one if you want to use open image denoise, which is like, I think Intel's one, right? You can do that. But you do want to go into the denoising. The render one's what matters the most, but I like turning on viewport so I can kind of see before I do the render what it's going to look like. Remember, the only other thing we really need to start to worry about is our view stuff, right? So if we go to view, you'll know that there is an area called cameras, and you can set it to active camera, and you see that's the actual camera that's right here, right? Now, this little guy right here, remember there's that little V that kind of points to the side? We've seen it before. It's how you get some properties and certain options for tools for modeling and things like that. But if I click on that, it opens this up, and you'll see that there is an area called view. And what you could do is you could set camera to view, right? And then you'll notice when I go in here and I rotate the camera, you'll notice I'm just using the regular navigation, right? Alt, left, middle, right mouse button. So this is a little trick that if you kind of just open up that little V right there, and you go to view and you just camera to view and just make sure to be viewing through camera, right? Active camera. You'll notice that you can actually get your regular navigation. Alt left mouse button for camera rotate, alt middle mouse button for move, alt right mouse button for zoom, right? And you can get that camera set up to properly render for you, right? So it's these cool little tricks that once you learn where they're at, they're pretty easy to use and pretty easy to get going. And Now we have the camera shot we like, right? We've got the denoisers on. We didn't really need to change the resolution because the default 1080 is fine. And now what we can do is we can go to render here. And of course there is the rendering compositing stuff, but we don't really need glows for this. If you do want glow for it, I would say watch the last video for the sci-fi room because we show how to use compositing there. So there's already a video that shows the compositing thing towards the end. But in this case, I'm just going to go render, right? Render image. And then what it's going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to render this car. Now, this could take longer or shorter depending on how powerful your computer is, right? It always kind of depends on that. But see how it's going through here and rendering. And we get the nice ray tracing. We get that kind of cool Nishida sky background, right? Remember, there's already a video for that as well. In this case, I don't really think I want to wait for the whole render to go through, right? So if you need to cancel the render, you just hit escape, right? Escape cancels the render. At this point, when the render is done, and you'll see it'll go through and finish all these boxes up, right? A lot of you guys are familiar with that from Maya, right? If you've used Maya before, you know it kind of renders in those little, what they call buckets, right? So it kind of just says, hey, I'm going to render this chunk, get it done, render this chunk, get it done. But escape will cancel your render. And when you're done and you're happy with the final render result, you go to image, and you can just do save. Or even save as if you want to be able to give it a name. You can tell it to be a different format. I would say JPEGs just because it opens in anything, but if you forget and it's PNG, PNG usually opens up in pretty much everything else also. But you can change your file formats. You can give it a name here, right? And we'll just call this final car. All right, and I'll just save it to desktop. There we go. And then, of course, I can close that up. And if I was to minimize this, we should be able to kind of see this here. Let's see. There it is. Double-click on it. And there is your final car render, right? In this case, I just canceled out of it, so it's only part of the render. But that is how that rendering setup goes for us, right? It's not terribly complicated, right? It's just a few things like making sure to view through your active camera. Make sure to kind of open up, click on that little V to open this up. Go to View tab, Camera to View. It's always a good idea to kind of turn this guy on so you can see viewport shading. And then you just go to that tab, right, your Scene tab, Cycles, open up the denoising to kind of turn those on. And that way you'll get a nice clean render. And then render image, right? And that's how you can get a final car picture ready to go. And what I want you guys to turn in is both your scene, right, so your Blender file. In particular, if you couldn't get to the render, and you're just like, well, I've got the car made, but I'm just not going to do the render, and I'm going to take a hit on some points there, right? I'll get like a B-, right? If you build a nice car and the model's good, but you don't get to the shading, you're not going to get an A, but you could still get like a low B, right? Because you still have done most of the project, and there's just some extra parts you didn't complete. But I want the Maya scene, the Blender scene, right? So you actually turn in your Blender file, but I also want this render, right? And at a minimum, the most important thing is the actual Blender scene. That way I can actually look at the car and actually look at it, right? And rotate around it, see the edge loops, things like that. But also the render. So if you get your rendering done, I also want the render. So you'll turn in two things. Okay, I think that'll probably be a great place to stop that recording.